Shallow Hal opens with Hal Larson, as he goes by the deathbed of his father, who gives him words of advice to never settle for average and to marry a young hot girl, not out of love, but for her beauty. Young Hal promises, just as his father passes away. Years later, Hal spends most of his nights getting rejected by women in a club, together with his equally shallow friend, Mauricio Wilson. They try to act cool and hip around them, but most women interpret their wild dance moves as obnoxious and see them as creeps and want nothing to do with them. The two friends sit down and have a beer as they discuss their love lives, and Hal mentions the promotion he expects to get tomorrow at his work. Mauricio says he is dating a girl, but reveals he plans to dump her, because her second toe is half an inch longer than her big toe. Hal shrugs and tells him that he is shallow to think like that, as it's not something worth breaking up a relationship. Hal then says he has to go as he has a date with his neighbor, Jill. When Hal meets with his neighbor, however, she tells him she is not attracted to him and wants to stop seeing him. Next day at work, Hal gets excited as his boss starts talking about the promotion position, but to his shock, his boss says a girl will be taking the spot instead. Heartbroken, after getting dumped and losing his promotion, he goes to lunch with his coworkers, who accuse him of being shallow and caring about nothing but physical appearance, and ask him when he's gonna get it. They tell him he's going for girls way out of his league, as he is not as pretty as the girls he aims for. Hal wants to see women for their inner beauty, but his appreciation of physical beauty gets in the way. While going to work one day, by an unexpected twist of fate, Hal meets the famous American life coach Tony Robbins, but they suddenly get trapped inside the elevator, and the two have a talk with each other about girls, while waiting for rescue.
See, the problem is I'm kind of picky.
What do you mean picky?
For instance, I like them real young.
Hal continues to give different references to the perfect combination of a girl he'd be into. The voice of one, the muscularity of another, the face of someone else, and so on. Robbins, understanding Hal's situation, hypnotizes him into seeing people's inner beauty, not their external selves. Hal leaves work and subsequently goes for a taxi back home, when he meets a beautiful girl named Katrina. They share the taxi and Hal nervously tries to get her number to take her out on a date, which she happily accepts. Hal goes out to celebrate with his friend Mauricio that night at the club, for scoring a date with Katrina, and tells him it was all thanks to Robin's hypno trick. Mauricio finds it hard to believe, and when he goes to the restroom, Hal talks with a pretty girl nearby and invites her to the dance floor. When Mauricio returns, he spots his friend dancing with a group of obese and unattractive girls. He is immediately shocked at the sight and goes to rescue his friend, but to his surprise, he finds Hal wanting to stay and flirt with the girls further. The next morning, Hal sends a voice message to Mauricio about last night, but quickly hangs up when fate makes him meet Rosemary, a woman who appears in a slender and beautiful figure due to her kind, generous nature, but is, in actuality, morbidly obese. After Hal talks his way to a date with Rosemary, she relents, and at first, she accuses him of being childish, because she thinks he's pretending to date her, but later realizes his feelings for her are genuine. Hal also finds out she is his boss's daughter and ends up getting her number before they part ways. Hal invites Rosemary to the park and introduces her to his friend Mauricio, who is worried about Hal's new taste in women, thinking he's gone crazy. Hal and Rosemary continue to date and do numerous activities together, like rowing, going to the pool, and then driving to Rosemary's parents for Hal to meet in person, including Rosemary's father and Hal's boss, Steve Shanahan. After dinner, Hal presents his ideas about the firm to Steve, and while Rosemary's father is impressed with the ideas and schedules a presentation for Hal to do, he tells him to cut the act, as he knows he is only dating his daughter to move up in the company. Hal says that he understands now why Rosemary has no confidence, as the expectations of her billionaire father are always too high to achieve and that she can never live up to his standards. After leaving, Hal tells Rosemary how lucky he is to have her, as he drives back to his place. As they get ready for bed, Rosemary undresses in front of Hal, who keeps seeing her slender and beautiful figure, but when she throws her panties in his face, he thinks she's throwing a prank on him, as they are way too big. They spend the night together, and in the next morning, Rosemary says she's never felt this happy in her life and that this feels too perfect. She goes back home when Jill opens her door and sees her. She knocks on Hal's door and invites him over to her place that night, but he immediately turns her down. Hal goes back to work where he does his little presentation, which gets approved by the whole board. Impressed, Steve calls him in his office and tells him he likes what Hal is doing for the company and gives him a promotion to work directly for him instead. Hal's coworkers come to congratulate him on his promotion, but find out about his relationship with Rosemary and tell him to cut the act and break up with her before he hurts her. Confused, Hal goes to work out in the gym with his good friend Mauricio, who tells him he needs to raise the bar higher and not date fatties. Hal gets angry and the two get in a heated argument, with Hal leaving early, but not before accusing Mauricio for dumping girls for small and irrelevant things. Hal and Rosemary plan a road trip with their disabled friend Walt, who had just sold his company to Microsoft. They meet his date, Tanya, who Hal sees as wrinkled and old woman, but in reality she is pretty and young. They arrive at a motel bar where they party and Rosemary meets her ex-boyfriend and boss in her medical center, Ralph. Meanwhile, concerned Mauricio believes what Robbins did to Hal was deceitful and wrong, and has a talk about what he did to his friend to make him date such ugly women. Robbins just says he altered his perception a bit and that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Mauricio gets confrontational and blames him for brainwashing Hal, but Robbins says that Mauricio is the one that is brainwashed, as everything he knows about beauty is pre-programmed from TV, magazines and movies. But after Mauricio says that Hal's job and personal life is in jeopardy, Robbins relents and says there is a way to unhypnotize Hal, but he will go back to his old, judgmental way of looking at women. Back at Hal, he's having dinner with Rosemary, when she tells him that Ralph called her and invited her on a trip to Caraba to help out women and children in need. Hal doesn't buy it, as the timing of her meeting her ex-boyfriend and then getting invited to go on a trip is too big of a coincidence. Just as they talk, the chair Rosemary sits on gives in and she falls on the ground. Outraged, Hal goes to talk to the pretty hostess and request another chair when Mauricio suddenly calls him and repeats the phrase "Shallow Hal wants a gal," to break the hypnosis. Hal closes the phone and turns around to see the hostess transform into someone completely different. When he starts making his way back to the table, he finds the obese Rosemary sitting there instead. Suddenly, Mauricio shows up and takes Hal outside to explain to him that he was hypnotized by Robbins to see ugly women as beautiful. Hal doesn't buy it and starts making his way back when he bumps into Katrina, who now appears without Hal's altered perception. Discovering that his own sight had misled him, Hal, with Mauricio's assistance, begin to avoid Rosemary until they can track down Robbins to hypnotize him again. But they are having a hard time finding Robbins and Rosemary becomes melancholic without Hal around. Still distraught, Hal gets a knock on his door from his neighbor, Jill, who invites him over to dinner, as the two go to the restaurant and discuss their relationship which never worked out. Rosemary, together with her parents, goes to the same restaurant where Hal and his hot neighbor are, and spots them on a table. Jill, who has been spectating Hal the past couple of weeks, says she originally found him shallow, but after seeing the women he went out with, says she's been wrong. She invites him to take the food to go and eat it in bed, together. After much deliberation, Hal ultimately declines her invitation and decides Rosemary is the one worth pursuing. Hal goes to use the phone when he unknowingly bumps into Rosemary, but never acknowledges her. He makes a call seconds later to her, but after witnessing his date with Jill, she calls him a psycho over the phone, which depresses Hal greatly. Days later, Steve tells Hal to stop seeing and bothering Rosemary. He tells him that she has accepted the Peace Corps job overseas and got together with Ralph again. Hal is determined to hear this from Rosemary in person however, and while searching for Rosemary to tell her the truth in person, he finds that Mauricio himself has his own reason for stopping Hal's hypnosis. He has a vestigial tail which has prevented him from ever getting close to a woman, and he was jealous that his friend found someone with whom he was happy. He eventually makes up with Mauricio, comes to terms with his feelings and his true love for Rosemary and decides to talk to her again. Hal and Mauricio drive up to the Peace Corps office, where he meets the real Ralph, but quickly finds out that Ralph and Rosemary are not actually together. They make their way to the Shanahan's mansion, where Hal enters and immediately starts making out with the maid, thinking it's Rosemary. Until Rosemary's mom interrupts him and leads him to the backyard to meet with her daughter. He finally finds Rosemary and apologizes to her for his behavior. But Rosemary says that it's too late, as her flight for Carabao leaves tonight and she will be gone for 14 months. Hal is determined however and says he can't wait that long, so he will come with her. The two kiss. Rosemary carries Hal to the car and the two leave happy and in love. Meanwhile, Mauricio finds a woman who likes dogs and invites her over for a drink, while wiggling his tail as the movie draws to a close.